Hi, everyone. Welcome to another amazing topic of conversation. I want to thank my sponsors, the Health Channel. So please sign up for their newsletter regarding anything that has to do with your health. And if you need working spaces, Alexa's Workspace can help you, whether it's a virtual office, an office for an hour, a boardroom, or for a whole year. Alexa's Workspaces. So, Tamara, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And the reason I wanted to invite you, being that you're a therapist, is because I recently wrote about an experience that I had when I was bullied by my opponent when I was running for office. And after the fact, we talked about it. And yes, he was following on uh, Trump's debate with Hillary Clinton in 2016 when it was about bullying. And he did the same thing. And instead of me answering back, I froze. And I had
Hmm.
never experienced that. For me,
Yeah,
it was like a new experience.
yeah.
Why did I freeze?
Well, we all have a nervous system, and it's really important to understand how we respond, how our nervous system responds when we experience stress. So, in that moment that you were, let's say, attacked or intimidated, even with words, you don't have to just be attacked physically.
Correct. It wasn't physically.
Right, words. It is a triggering situation. It doesn't feel good. So, as the recipient, when you experience something that makes you feel threatened, uncomfortable, your nervous system will activate. And there are different levels of activation, if you will. You might not feel anything. You might get a little bit, triggered, or you might have a pretty significant response. So when we get activated, when our nervous system gets activated, when we experience a threat of different levels, sometimes we fight back, sometimes we run away, sometimes we freeze. So it's actually a very normal stress response. It's not as something went wrong with you. It's in that moment, in that circumstance, you experienced a trigger. It felt very uncomfortable to you. And in that moment, maybe you felt startled. You might have felt a lot of things, but in that moment you froze. And that happens, it's one of the ways our nervous system responds to a threat.
So this is a form of at is bullying a form of attack, like a form of a verbal attack?
Yeah. So when a person bullies another, there's a desire to control, there's a desire to exert power. You know, sometimes people intentionally bully to obtain a result. So it's a way of manipulating. So I get you to do something. So that's force, right? That's power. Sometimes, let's say somebody wants to intimidate you. That's bullying. Verbally saying things that belittle, that make you feel less. That's bullying. I don't think necessarily bullying is happening more and more nowadays. I think now we're just talking more about it. You know,
Yeah.
um,
But
it's a,
in
it's a
adults, because we always talk about the bullying in schools and bullying in kids, but nobody has ever talked about bullying in adults, like in the workspace.
yeah, yeah, and it's a form of harassment. You're
Right.
you're attempting to impact another person. Um, and it is definitely something that we're talking more and more about. So it's all over the place. But I'm sure this has been happening for as long as human beings are in the presence of another. There can be some bullying.
And all this came back because, and I just want to be clear, this is not about politics. But when we saw the debate, I felt exactly like how Biden felt. that he couldn't answer. Was that like a form of he froze?
Maybe, maybe. I'm not sure exactly what was happening inside of him, but freezing is a way, that it's a way we can respond, when we're feeling threatened. Unfortunately, in debates, like the one, that was on last week, I think when a person is in that environment and that is a part of what they do, it's likely that you get used to discussing things. Like if it's a political debate, I think that your opponent is going to attack. As we've seen that in the past, right?
Yeah, we've
People
seen it.
attack, and yes. So in a way, when you're in an environment in that happens, your nervous system might be a little bit more primed for it. Like you might be expecting already. It may not startle you as much. But if you are at the workplace and if you are talking to another person, or you're not in a way expecting it, it might alert you and trigger you even more. It's unexpected.
So how do you overcome that? Like
Well,
I remember that day saying, okay, I needed one of those slaps and just get it over with and back to normal, and thinking everything I should have said. And I
yeah.
couldn't.
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, you were doing a debate with an opponent, right?
It wasn't even a debate.
Oh, it wasn't a debate.
No, no, no. It wasn't even a debate.
Yeah.
It was that we saw each other in the polling place and he just started screaming at me and I froze.
Oh, wow. Wow. And bullying of any kind, in any way, threatening, harassing, coercing a person, it's never okay. It's never, ever okay. But it happens. People, they have egos. We all have egos to a certain level. And, bullying can happen. I think that when you're in a setting, let's say a debate, it's always helpful to prime yourself, to prepare yourself before you go in. Because if you get a little bit more primed, you kind of go in knowing what you're going into, then whatever a person says may not trigger you as much. Now, when you're not in a setting where there is that debate and those things can, attacks
Can
can
catch
happen.
you off guard.
Yeah, yeah. When your question was, how do we prepare for that, or how we deal or
How do
handle
we
that?
overcome it? Or, yeah, how do we
Yeah,
deal with it?
I think this is a deeper conversation that we even need to look at ourselves, our self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves. We need to look at even going back a little bit to how we grew up. Let's say at home, there was, in a way, disrespect, abuse. There was just the dynamic between parents, between siblings of talking down to. That, in a way, if you think about it, a person grows up, but that aspect can be something that molds a person's sense of self and self-esteem. You may, if you grew up a little bit with an environment where that's a form of the dynamic of the conversation in the family, it can normalize a little bit, so that's something to pay attention to. Look at your own home and notice, what's the vibe, what's the energy in the home. Am I role modeling proper relationship and communication for the children? Because that kind of continues how we even let ourselves be treated in the future.
What happens, for example, about bullying in the workforce when there's like an excess of power? Like,
Mm-hmm.
for example, the bosses that they accept power because they know you need a job. Like,
Yeah.
how do you encounter that part? What advice would you give those people that are experiencing that? That
Yeah.
unfortunately they cannot change jobs, or they're afraid to change jobs, but they're also being bullied
Yeah.
because they're being taken advantage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's not legal. So there are places, organizations should have in place a way to deal with bullying, harassment, all of that. Not always. Unfortunately,
But
not always.
remember that if the person is experiencing bullying and they're afraid of
Yeah,
leaving, they're also going to be afraid of exposing that person.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's complicated because not always will an organization do something about it. Not always. Not always it'll be fair, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it's complex, it's complicated. A person shouldn't go to work and feel unsafe on its own. That is already detrimental to a person's nervous system to go into work feeling unsafe, and you shouldn't keep yourself in an unsafe situation. I think that's just something to really consider. Let's say it's verbal comments, passive aggressive comments, little digs here and there. A person could, depending on how the reality is in the workplace, could go and make a complaint. Let's say a person doesn't, and they just choose not to for fear, for whatever. I think this person would benefit from really contemplating what's stopping me. What can I say? How can I put a stop to it? Verbalize it to the bully, to that person exerting power. Because usually a bully bullies someone they deem to be more vulnerable. Usually a bully does not bully somebody that they don't deem to be stronger than them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a perception of vulnerability. I think sometimes somebody can perceive you as vulnerable, but then you stand up for yourself and you verbalize, not with an attack back. You don't have to, but with assertiveness. And you set that boundary and you let it be known the way you express yourself. You let it be known that you're not vulnerable just by
That
the
you're
way you respond.
that you're setting boundaries.
Yes. And
Okay.
then the bully sees that. They know who they can mess with, you know?
But okay, that's one situation. But after it happens, how do you get that confidence back so that you can set boundaries?
Yeah. Well, first we need to see, how is your confidence? How is the person's confidence level? Do they feel like they can express themselves? Now, let's say, for example, in your situation, I know you're a confident woman, you are well spoken, and in that moment, it was maybe a startling experience. All of a sudden, that person just really bullied you. You might find yourself a bit startled, like, what just happened?
A bit? You think froze was a
Yeah,
bit?
yeah. And I think it's so powerful to take every experience as a moment to pause and reflect. I made a commitment with myself that whatever I experience, whatever emotions I have, fear, insecurity, I would look at it a little further. So, whatever experience a person has, if they feel a little intimidated, insecure, without power, that they stop for a minute and they ask themselves some important questions. Like, where is this coming from? Why do I feel powerless? And just notice, have you always felt this way? Is there a little bit of like a a self-esteem issue, that maybe that person needs to work on? Because you may change jobs, but if you don't believe in yourself, if you don't learn how to set boundaries, if you don't, take up space, it might happen somewhere else too, you know?
Correct. You're going to repeat the whole thing.
Yeah, we can't prevent people from being jerks. We can't. People are going to be who they are, you know? We can learn and notice, okay, what happened? What led me to feel that way? Or what could I say? How can I set the boundary thereafter? But just reflecting on, how do I truly feel about myself, helps us learn better skills and even learn to love yourself, more.
Well, at that moment, it wasn't that I didn't learn how to love myself more. At that moment, I was angry at
I think it's
myself
shock. It was shock.
that I couldn't even answer. And then, of course, after the fact, there was a whole thing of I should have said this, I should have done this, I should have,
Yeah. And
but
we
it
do
was
that.
after the fact.
I think that happens when there's a moment of shock, not just with bullying, but how many times, at least it's happened with me so many times, But how many times have you found yourself perhaps in a situation where in the moment you acted a certain way, but then afterwards you're like, oh, I should have said this. Oh, I should have said that.
Oh, a million times.
Yeah, because we tend to think and process all the time, and we put meaning to everything. Of course, later on, we're going to be overthinking and replaying scenes, and we're going to find ways that we could have done it better. When it comes to bullying, it's also that shock factor. It's like you're in disbelief that you were just mistreated.
Like the unexpected.
Yeah.
But it was the inaction.
Yeah. And with our nervous system, like I said, freeze is one of the responses that a person can have. And it's not unusual when you're in a moment of shock or danger or threat, whether it's perceived threat or actual threat, that, our thinking brain steps offline a little bit. And it's more of that survival mechanism that comes in. That's part of our stress response. And freeze is one of our survival mechanisms. And it's not even something you choose. Your brain chooses it for you.
So
you're like, what?
Yeah.
It is. It's not something you go, let me freeze. Let me not say anything.
Correct. Let me freeze. Yeah. No, it's something that you don't control. But for example, let's say it happens again and it's the same situation, unexpected. I'm going to, how do you avoid happening again that you freeze? Is there any way you can avoid it or no?
Well, it depends. Depends on the threat. It depends on the situation. So it's a very primal response from our nervous system. Like if you think about it, you may be freezing in that moment, but that doesn't mean you're not surging with electricity inside of your body. There's a lot of movement there. You're just frozen. I think in your situation, considering, let's look at a debate, for example. Practice will make you freeze less because it's less threatening. In that moment, I'm not sure what was said or how threatening and how negative it was, but it sounds like not just you froze, but you were a bit shocked and you were a bit startled. Like, what just happened? And sometimes that's a response we have. And I'm glad that you didn't punch him or attack him or lose your...
I wish I had done anything else except freeze, standing there like, what?
Yeah. And what happened afterwards? Do you remember? Like after you felt like the freeze response went away, do you remember what happened?
I was still in shock that I couldn't believe that I froze and that I couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
I think that affected me. So I remember calling my sister, who's a clinical psychology, and asking her, okay, I need the quick response to this. I need like the slap in the face to get me out of it.
Yeah.
And I don't remember what happened in between, but I just remember just standing there and not being able to even say anything.
Yeah. And it's very, it's overwhelming when in a moment of shock, when we freeze, because it can have a very negative impact to how we perceive ourselves. Oftentimes when a person freezes, it can lead a person afterwards to feel weak, to feel like I wasn't able to do this or I wasn't able to talk back. So I think afterwards, having that meeting with yourself or a loved one or somebody, a friend, a support system.
Yes, that I thought about it. This cannot put me down. And on the contrary.
Yeah.
On the contrary, it made me stronger. And the good thing is, like the conclusion of the whole thing was that now I understand the attack and I understand the whole feeling behind it and what happened to get the tools and be able to control it.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah. And, I'm sure every person on some level, I think it would be safe to say every person alive has experienced somebody disrespecting them. where you find yourself like just in shock and disbelief.
Like, why are you doing that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the more we kind of just sit with that experience a little bit and process and even notice what to do next, it primes us to have these conversations with ourselves, to even look at the person, whoever, not just that person that attacked you, but approach a person who utilizes words or abuse and look at them and say, are you okay? Because the way you're approaching me right now is unusual. There are ways that we can respond, but it's something that we kind of learn to do. So then in the future, you prime yourself, so you can respond and feel like you addressed somebody disrespecting you.
So when you address it, it's like you take away the spell.
Yeah. And like I said, there's so many little things that we can do just to learn a skill. How to respond to a bully, how to respond to somebody who's attempting to verbally take my power or humiliate me, and just in increasing your skill set, just on a day like today, we're talking about it, whoever's listening, this is an opportunity for them to reflect and increase their skill set. It's things you can say, which instead of absorbing what the negativity somebody throws at you, it's almost like imagining this filter where you observe, but you don't absorb. And you just utilize that as a way to look at the person and say, that was unnecessary, or are you okay? Because this is an unusual behavior, and it kind of debunks a
Correct.
bit.
It creates like a magic and undo the spell that they cast on you.
Yeah.
I like the part that it was this necessary. Okay.
Yeah.
So Tamara, thank you. Hopefully this doesn't happen again, but if it does, then definitely now I grew out of it.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
able to come back the next day to bowling and I was definitely feeling more strong. And no, that happened once and never again. Well,
Yeah.
hopefully. But thank you. And to all of you experiencing bullying, experiencing attacks, there is help out there. So
Yeah.
please look for help and we don't need to face this alone. So thank you so much. And above all, stay safe.
Thank you.